what does it mean to be Malaysian? I don't know myself. Usually we come and talk about economics. That's a lot easier. There's numbers, there's figures. So, and numbers and figures is very easy to interpret. But if you're talking about national unity, about what does it really mean, especially in a country like Malaysia, you ask different people, they will give different answers, and you will get different interpretations and different reporting. So, I think the best way for me to approach tonight is perhaps to give a different perspective, because I may come from slightly different background than most of us today. While I was actually out of town today, so while traveling, coming back to KL this afternoon, I was thinking, how exactly do I start my session tonight? So I thought, okay, why don't I share actually? A lot of you, I'm sure, come from urban background. There are not many Malays or Bumiputras here. And that's, to a certain extent, that's really our problem in Malaysia, because there's not really a lot of mixed experiences going around. So perhaps what I can add to the table tonight is present some perspective. What does it mean for me to grow up as a Malaysian? From a kampung boy, because I was born in the Malay Highlands in Terengganu. My parents were not educated formally. So I was your typical kampung boy with not so much education, my family background. But of course, you had some opportunities and so on. So growing up, it was very different, because we all live in compartmentalized section of our societies. The Malays in Kedah or in Terengganu or even parts of Selangor actually live as if there's no other people in the country. And I'm sure if you go and speak to other sections of communities, the Indians and the Chinese, we all grow up thinking as if Malaysia is interpreted from our perspective and worldview, because we don't mix that much. I was quite lucky, because back then, and that not too long ago, it was 15, 20 years back. Back then, actually, a lot of parents still send, a lot of non-Malay parents still send children to sekolah rendah. There's not too much sekolah kebangsaan, it's inherited from the English schools. So at least I had the opportunity of having classmates from Chinese, from Indians, In fact, we had one Filipino back then. But over the years, as our schools become more polarized, and I don't think it's purely because of race reasons or anything. It's mostly because of needs and trust, of the education system. But the effect of that is a lot of our children, especially, will view everything from one perspective. If it's Malay, we view it from Malay perspective. If it's Chinese, from Chinese perspective. In my case, it was even more weird, because after my primary school from kampung, where mostly they were Malays, even the Chinese in the East Coast actually are quite Malay. They speak better Terengganu slang than I do nowadays. So, but I went on to Malay College in Kuala Kangsar, and that's where it was really weird, because it's an all Malay boy residential school, with more than half of the teaching faculty are the non-Malays, and that's where I think if I were to be asked, how do I describe growing up in Malaysia? To me, it's full of dichotomies, it's full of conundrums, it's full of contradictories, because for those who grow up like me in that environment, we're all Malay boys, but the people who influence us most at that very important growing period, a lot of them are the non-Malays, because our best at maths teachers were the non-Malays, the Chinese or Indians. My sports teachers were the Indians. So that's where the dichotomies began. On one hand, you view things thoroughly from a Malay, one-sided perspective. But yet, on day-to-day basis, on our any affairs, food, teaching, classroom, and so on, race, at least back then in schools, not nowadays, but back then in schools, at least race was not really an issue. So, coming back from what YB Hana mentioned just now, a lot of us were the lost generation of confused people of our identities, because even in the 90s and late 80s, this BTN propaganda has started to slip in schools. So on one hand, you go out and have dim sum and Chinese pao with your pao with your teachers. On the other hand, the other group of people will say that Chinese is out to get us out of this country, that kind of thing. So I was lucky because I've had the opportunity to leave the country for a while, so that opens up our worldview. Being overseas again is a dichotomy, because you come from different backgrounds, and even back then you have quite skewed perception about how race relations, national unity, and everything. And there are very sensitive issues, especially when it comes to Malay rights, so to speak, back then, economic empowerment and so on. But when you are overseas, I think a lot of us stop looking from race perspectives. So these are Malaysians. We can actually choose to turn on and turn off. When do we want to be Malaysians, or when do we want to be our ethnic backgrounds, whether we are Malays and so on? And how do we want to move forward, especially after 53 years? It's a joke that we still go through the kind of things we go through lately. First and foremost, I think we really have to put aside this distrust, and that means understanding and sharing. And this kind of functions, discourses, it helps a lot, because I hope there are questions that I hope people come with a view to understand. And in the same way, I think, despite whatever controversies being made out over the last 1 month, when YBs, non-Malay YBs, non-Muslims visited Suraus, attend Buka Puasa and so on, do not underestimate the kind of goodwill that is being generated from that. It is slowly thrashing away the wall of distrust. And we can only move forward if we do more and more of this. It cannot just remain a slogan. Malays, for example, it's only when they see actually people make a lot of effort to come and sit down for Buka Puasa. It may sound small to a lot of you, but it means a lot. And it's only this way, I think, the past 1 year, 2-3 months, we have made a lot of progresses in breaking down this wall of distrust. So likewise, we need more and more as well leaders from the other communities to come and cross, exchange, discuss, defend. You see, in any society, in any issues, there will always be extremists, people who are on the fringe, whose views are quite, out of sync with the rest. You can't eliminate that. In even the most matured democracies, we will always have that. Let alone in a country with such diverse backgrounds and ethnicities like ours, to actually have an environment where we all can live and kiss each other. That's a utopia. I don't expect that to happen, not in my lifetime, not in another 2-3 lifetimes. But at least what we should all aspire to have is to make sure that these extremist views are left on the fringe. Because we must allow the voice of reasons, rationalities to take place. And who says? You see, the problem is because of the distrust that has been built for so long, different sections of our societies do not even have the confidence to come together and argue and agree to disagree. We don't have to agree on everything. Because a lot of the problems that we have in this country is a problem of approaches, a problem of mechanism. The question of how do we close the gap in terms of economic participation between the different races. We have one goal, but there are different mechanisms and different approaches. We can discuss, so long as we are agreeable to be able to sit down and discuss. And I think for the next Merdeka Day and so on, if we can continue to do this, I think we have really made a steady progress. Until and unless we do that, we will still live in a world of dichotomies, in a world of conundrums. We eat roti canai that supposedly originate from India, have our teh tarik, but we have never seen an escape.